This is Delek US Innovation Arm. We founded that arm in 2018 with the goal of helping and supporting Delek US in transforming its business from a traditional midstream, downstream oil and gas to something that will be greener and better operated. So we are looking into both technologies that will help us make our business better, as well as things that will help us fully transform the business. And we have with us today an amazing group of panelists. I think people that can shed some light on different aspects of the business. So I'm going to go ahead and let quickly each and every one introduce himself, and we will move to some of our discussion points, and would love to have questions from the audience, and we'll try to provide our best perspective and insights to your questions. So let me start first with Steve Wesley. Steve from Wesley Group, if you could please introduce yourself.
You bet. First, I just have to say, if any of you wonder why is California a global leader in renewable energy, a lot of it is because of the work that Bob Herzberg did as Speaker of our legislature. So Bob, thank you. Just briefly, I'm the rare person, maybe many of you have met, who actually grew up in this thing called Silicon Valley. And I have a 30-year track record as an entrepreneur here. I'm best known as taking eBay public in 1998. After that, I did something a little unusual. I was drafted and ran for and was elected controller and chief financial officer of the state of California, which was then and now the world's 5th largest economy. In the middle of my term, something fairly unusual happened. We had a recall over guess what, an energy crisis. And I suddenly found myself working for an Austrian bodybuilder. I ran for governor in 2006 myself. I lost narrowly by 3.5 points. My wife was delighted, and I came back to Silicon Valley and founded the Wesley Group, and we are today one of the largest venture firms in North America, focusing on smart energy, smart mobility, smart buildings. So we do a lot with Israel because you are a global sustainability and mobility leader. We're lucky enough to have had 6 IPOs, including Tesla Motors, and we do a lot of work with Delek because, again, we look to Israel for leadership. We in Silicon Valley believe that Israel and Silicon Valley are leading the world in innovation in these sectors. So I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Steve. Our second panelist, Andrea Torrent from National Grid. If you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Torrent. I'm an investing partner at National Grid Partners. I'm very happy to be here, and thanks to the organizers for setting this up. I've been doing investments and technology here in Silicon Valley for the past 30 years, just like Steve. I started doing investments at Intel Capital. I was one of the earliest investors working for Les Fidesz at Intel Capital back in the mid-90s. Then I went off to various VC firms over the years, and about 3 years ago, we put together National Grid Partners, which is the investment and innovation arm for National Grid. And National Grid is one of the world's largest investor-owned utilities. We've regulated and unregulated businesses spanning both the UK and the US. Primarily, we're distribution, not generation, but I can talk more about that later. But I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Andrea. Moving on to 2 wonderful ladies. I just noticed we have a pretty good balance in terms of diversity in this panel. So Phoebe Wang from Shell Ventures, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sarit. Hi, everyone. My name is Phoebe Wang, principal at Shell Ventures, and I feel extremely honored to be speaking at the same event with Senator Herzberg, and then also Steve, Wesley, Andrea, and later Johanna. So for Shell Ventures, obviously we are the venture capital arm for Royal Shell. We've been around for over 2 decades. Things that we are looking at are primarily in the power, mobility, and renewables. And so, in fact, Shell Ventures sits in this new organization called Renewable Energy and Solutions. It kind of shows you some directions that where we are going. And in terms of myself, I'm actually leading the investment thesis for hydrogen, and then also chairing the Frontier Tech Early Stage Fund for Shell Ventures. For the in my past, I've been like working in energy industries for almost 2 decades, as I mentioned in the previous roundtable, and then started as a venture capitalist, primarily investing in clean tech and now climate tech since 2012, and then also leading the diversity and inclusion task force. So really happy to see a balanced panel today. Okay, over back to you, Sarit.
Thank you very much. Last but not least is Dr. Joanna Wolfson from Prime Impact Fund. Dr. Wolfson, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Sarit, and nice to see everybody here. As Sarit mentioned, I'm with Prime Impact Fund. We are sort of a unique venture investing shop. We aggregate philanthropic and catalytic capital, specifically to support companies before they can be supported by other types of venture. And that means we're looking for, typically specific types of technical risk or market risk that could be bought down on our scale of capital of a few $1 million in early on in a company's life. We are totally focused on big swings and climate. So that means that any company that we invest in should have the potential for large scale emissions reduction on the order of gigatons over the next few decades. We've also, separate from our investing activities, have developed kind of an in-house methodology for doing that modeling for forward-looking projections on climate impact that is now available kind of open source for other groups to use, called Crane Tool. And we are not sector focused at all. So if you look at our portfolio of investments, it kind of ranges from energy, ag, waste, and water. And again, that's because we're focused on emission sources wherever they come from. Because we are uniquely aggregating what we call this catalytic capital, that tends to focus us more toward hardware-based companies that have longer timeframes to market, higher capital intensity. And that's just because those are the companies that, there are exceptions, but those are the companies that tend to, on average, be less of a strong fit, especially early on in their lives, for other venture sources. And so that's a place that we can be very additional and catalytic, which is what we aim for. My background is in physical chemistry and materials, so I come to this venture investing world from a very technical one, where then prior to Prime, I worked with startups on commercializing new technologies, initially at an industry applied R&D lab called Fraunhofer, and subsequently led the US Department of Energy's Tech to Market office.
Thank you, Joanna. So I want to take a couple of minutes just to provide some background towards our discussion. In the last years, energy transition is almost everywhere. We've been hearing about it throughout the last days as well. So Paris Agreement becomes a reality. ESG pressure is tremendous on people like us, operators in the energy sector. And I think it's very important for the audience to understand the massive change that we, the utilities, the entities, need to undergo in order to make the transformation happen. It's about technology adoption. It's about change management. It's about our ability to rethink our business in all aspects, what products we produce and how we operate the business. And one of the best ways to do it is by collaborating with a broader ecosystem, young startup companies, other venture partners, and I think all of us in this panel doing that for some time and trying to improve. And we want to talk about what we do and how best we can collaborate both with companies and with other partners. So starting, Steve, with you, you have many corporate LPs in your fund. Could you share a little bit, how are you helping them to prepare to those massive changes? And when it comes to entrepreneurs, what would be your advice on how to approach and what are you looking for?
You bet. So first, we're fortunate to have 15 of the world's largest energy and auto companies as entrepreneurs. Everybody from China Light and Power in China, the Origin in Australia, to Eon an ABB in Europe, many in the US. What people need to realize is that there's a revolution going on in energy. The cost down curve of renewables has changed everything, and that in concert with a 90% reduction in battery costs. And as you may have seen, both Tesla and Volkswagen have just both committed to take battery costs down an extra 50% over the next 5 to 6 years. There's a complete change in the energy world. We're advising our energy partners to really do two things. One, in the past, it was good enough to show up with a very simple menu. For most utilities, the menu said one thing: electrons, maybe electrons and gas molecules. What we believe now is that all of our energy partners need to understand this new world. And we're moving from a world where their sole job was to generate power to now distribute and manage it. Therein, they need to have a new 21st century menu. And that new menu, even if you're an energy company, probably has a mobility offerings, and it has customer residential offerings, business offerings, maybe a resilience offering. But you need to understand you're not just power producers, you are distributors and managers of the electrons as well. For entrepreneurs, there's three things. It's easy. I'm going to tell you this. I teach on the faculty at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. You won't need the MBA. One, we live in a world where you must move quickly. In the old world, my dad would say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That doesn't cut it anymore. Things are moving faster than ever. The people who win are the people who move fastest. Second, you need to have a real business plan. At our firm, we see 2,500 companies a year. That's a lot. And one of the first things we do to cut out the ones we cannot go deeper on is this a firm with a 20 or 30 or 40% gross margin, or is it a 60, 70, or 80% gross margin? If it's the latter, that usually gets a second or third look. Third thing is, almost all of our entrepreneurs, well over 50%, are immigrants. Immigrants from China, immigrants from Israel, immigrants from India, immigrants from Iran. Immigrants significantly outperform. Over half the companies taken public in the United States are taken public by immigrants. Immigrants are not the problem in our country. They are our greatest competitive advantage. But most of our founders tend to be deeply technical. And what we're looking for is the entrepreneurs that have the emotional understanding to combine their skills with a strong sales team. And we really push all of our firms hard on, do you have sales talent in the company? Do you have a clear go-to-market strategy? If they do, they're likely to get to the final rounds with us. And I'll tell you right now, there's never been a better time to be an investor. If you have a business plan, send it to me today.
Thank you, Steve. Moving on to Andrea, National Grid was a leader in pushing investment over the years. Can you share some light on the journey, the transformation journey that National Grid is going, and what are you looking for, and how you as a CVC support National Grid transformation?
Sure. Thanks, Sarit. I'm happy to talk about our journey. First, for folks, I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about what National Grid's priorities are. That will give good context into how National Grid Partners is set up to support that. So like I said, National Grid is one of the world's largest investor-owned utilities. We've got regulated and unregulated businesses, both in the UK and the US. Primarily in the US, it's in New York and New England. And mostly we're a gas and electric distribution utility, not generation. Although there's a little bit of gas generation in Long Island that we have, not much, and those are going to be decommissioned over the next few years. But we also have, we're now entering into large-scale renewable businesses as well. So we just purchased a company in the US called Geronimo, and we've renamed it National Grid Renewables, and they're a large-scale developer of wind and solar. So on the generation side, we're now getting into, large-scale renewables. All of that said, helping the world address climate change is a top corporate objective for National Grid. So we've got an ambitious green strategy for reaching net zero emissions by 2050 from a 1990 baseline. And that includes our own operations and emissions that result from the sale of our electricity and gas to our customers. National Grid also recognizes that decarbonizing our electric and gas systems will require resolving many questions and seeking new technologies, partnerships, energy policies, regulatory models, and strategic investments. And the strategic investment side is what we're focused on here at National Grid Partners. Some of National Grid's focus areas to get to net zero for folks to understand here, I'm going to list some of these things, is reducing demand through energy efficiency and demand response, decarbonizing the gas network with renewable natural gas and hydrogen, reducing methane emissions, innovative technologies to decarbonize heat, operating and interconnecting large-scale renewables like I talked about, enabling and optimizing distributed generation, grid storage solutions, and then advancing green, clean transportation like EVs. So about 3 years ago, National Grid formed National Grid Partners. We're the innovation and investment arm, the CVC arm of National Grid. Our objective is to bring outside disruptive technologies and innovation into National Grid and help foster a culture of innovation. We're up to about 40 people at this point, which is quite large for a CVC operation. We're based in Silicon Valley, which is also unique because National Grid is based in the Northeast US and UK. So why did we set ourselves up in Silicon Valley? It's to be at the center of innovation and to approach innovation from an outside in perspective instead of inside out. We only have about 6 or so investors in National Grid Partners. I'm one of them. So most all of our employees within National Grid Partners are actually business development and innovation people who are focused on working with our business units internal to National Grid. Their job is to uncover use cases and help bring outside innovative technology inside to National Grid. So we support National Grid in all of its strategic initiatives, not just the green strategy. The way we describe it is decarbonization, digitization, and decentralization. So pursuing each of these will not only help National Grid achieve its overall green strategy, but will help us improve our operating efficiency, safety, security, and cost for our customers. So that means our investment thesis within National Grid Partners is actually pretty broad, and it's more than just supporting the green transition of National Grid. So we're focused on areas like data analytics, AI and machine learning, IoT and edge computing, SaaS and cloud computing, cybersecurity is a big area, and safety, energy efficiency, grid modernization, distributed grid, asset management solutions, and digitization, basically of all things enterprise and IT related. So it's a pretty broad mandate for a utility. And if you look at our portfolio we have right now, it's about 25 companies, and we're invested in several other VC funds. And if you look at the portfolio, it's pretty broad and covers all of those areas. We've invested a total of about $300 million now over the last 3 years, about 25 portfolio companies. And we have some, like I said, some VC funds for geographic reach, including we're an investor in Jerusalem Venture Partners in Israel, which helps us with sort of scoping out technologies and companies and people on the ground in Israel. And that's worked out for us well. Overall, I think the consensus from within National Grid is that our National Grid Partners has been quite successful in our mission. We've brought a lot of new technologies and solutions into National Grid, and our portfolio is doing pretty well right now. So I'll turn it back to you, Sarit.
Thank you, Andrea. Senator, if you are still with us, one of the topics that we prize and a lot is collaboration. So it will be interesting to hear from you your perspective on how to promote collaboration within the industry. I think we all agree it's going to be critical to the success of this transformation.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I see that my colleague, the handsome Henry Stern, has joined. He's got a little bit of pandemic facial hair, but he's still handsome. And he cares deeply about this issue. He's my colleague from Los Angeles. But can I give you kind of a broader perspective? Because I both marry, the early adoption, as Steve was saying, on all of this stuff and the transformation. And I just want to give you a real bare knuckle, straight up analysis from my point of view, and it may be a little rough, but that's okay. Look, sure. You've got this horrible dynamic where politicians want to get out there and announce they're changing the world, and they want headlines that we've done all this great stuff. But God's in the details, and the transformation of moving from point A to point B is extraordinary. All of the incumbent industries will kneecap you any chance they can through their coalitional partners, who works for them, what their friends are, tell you all the reasons why you're horrible. Second, your competition will kneecap you because now, oh, I'm in hydrogen. Solar is horrible. Wind doesn't work. It kills birds. Everybody finds a reason, as we're trying to change the world, why they're competitor. In my world, I had such a problem that I had non-based silicon solar in my factory in Wales, and everybody's saying, oh, that doesn't work, right? So I'm fighting all of those guys. Then you've got the larger problem of the fact that the real world, and it's still happening today, and with all the companies that Steve's working on, like I left South Central LA for my second solar company. I was at Martin Luther King Boulevard in Alameda in South LA, first solar company, only solar manufacturer. When they asked me to fill out all those documents, I had to commit perjury because all that crap that was in there. And they just, all the stuff we make these regulations. I went to Europe, not because the markets or whatever. I'd never been to Wales in my whole life, but because there were two issues that are really practical. One, banks. I couldn't get banks to figure out how to finance my technology because they didn't understand what the risk was. Second, insurance companies. The insurance business didn't understand how to measure the risk. First Solar had this problem of carcinogenics and this one and that, and your competition does everything they can to mess you up. Last, government will cut your knees off in a nanosecond if there's a problem. Last year, we had brownouts and blackouts. Everybody's pointing fingers. We got every agency under the sun with everybody on the payroll all over the place trying to figure out the future. And in the meantime, everybody's blaming everybody. And then what ends up happening is then the incumbents say, see, this stuff doesn't really work, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's no question, as Steve mentioned appropriately and correctly, that costs have gone down dramatically, but there's still so many other risks that are informed by the ineptitude of how the systems work. And it's quite challenging. We talk about how much money Silicon Valley raises, but when I was looking at it years ago, most of that money was being raised in Silicon Valley, but invested in other parts of the world. It wasn't happening here. Our numbers are much better in California, and we're moving dramatically. And now the investor-owned utilities are saying, well, we just want to be pipes and wires companies, and you guys figure out how to deal with all this stuff. But with resource adequacy and Polar and all of, providers of last resort and all of these other deals, Henry Stern, who's here, wants to be Mr. Microgrid, brilliant idea, but, there's just a lot of challenges with that stuff. So it's, one of the reasons I just finished here, I'm going on too long, but I came back in government is there's no more headlines in this stuff. It's just doing the tough stuff and figuring out how to really make the systems work, none of which will get you on the front page of the paper, all of which will make the systems work. And when you drill in and figure out how you make that transition from the old world order that now we're seeing happen, but there's still hundreds of pieces and parts that we have to get right to get to goal. And we will, but it's going to be a bumpy road.
Thank you, Senator. We have two questions in the chat box. I'm sorry for jumping in. One question is actually for the investors that are here in the room regarding your involvement with early stage startups, and if there is any room for, seed round A startups in these big infrastructure projects. So this is the one question that I saw in the text. In the chat box, and there was another question regarding government and technology collaboration in terms of state infrastructures that projects that are coming here in California. So
is that to me? Is that to Herzberg? Is that to Wesley? Or is it to Stern? Who's it to?
Well, let's start with the investors.
Yes, I think Phoebe can address the early stage since she has a lot of involvement in that. Phoebe?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Yeah, I would definitely say that if you have the great idea, and don't worry about whether you're seed or Series A, right? You should definitely jump into that. And I do have an example and story to tell about that if we have like maybe 2-3 minutes. So Shop Ventures, we do look at companies like as early as if you're in the laboratory bench, right? So we invested very early on in the space with our sister group called Game Changer. And then actually last year, or actually 2 years ago now, since we're in 2021, we actually started looking at like hydrogen in aviation, and that was a pretty pioneer concept like in 2019. Now it's like everyone is jumping into, because you have like a different airlines saying that they're going to go to carbon neutrality and hydrogen is the way to go. But it wasn't the case 2 years ago. And there's this startup called Zero Avia coming into our pipeline and saying that, hey, they're going to do the revolutionary thing about like using hydrogen fuel cell to power the planes, which is very, very, like, even to our hydrogen experts internally, right? Hey, you're a startup, you're like a seed stage, and then you're trying to revolutionize this, where you have like the incumbents which can put in hundreds of millions of dollars to change or to develop in terms of R&D. So I still remember like 2 years ago when I called the CEO Val saying that, hey, we're not going to move forward with the deal, but we want to kind of collaborate with you going forward. And then he's like, typically when entrepreneur receive this kind of calls, right, they would say, oh, it's it's going to be not a happy call. But then for him, it's just really interesting that he's so firm, that so believing in his idea that the fundamental works in his opinion, and then he has secured like some government funding, and then he also put his own personal funding in there. So fast forward a year ago in September, just 6 months ago from now, right? They actually successfully fly the first hydrogen-powered aviation in UK, and then they got invited by Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, to join the Jet Zero Council, along with some really, really big company CEO, including Shell. So they're fast forward, like they're really like moving very fast, and it's kind of give you a feel like a criteria that when you are thinking about starting your next venture or next company, right? One is you need to really find the fundamental problem that you can have a solution to. So in this case, the fundamental works for that. You just need to have the execution. And two, been seeing a lot of companies go busted, like after the Clean Tech 1.0, is because you have an influx of capital coming in, where entrepreneurs actually, or CEOs, are kind of put less emphasis on the techno economics and more on the just a pure R&D side, and not really on the go-to-market strategy. So we think that it's really important, if you have the great idea, if you've kind of solved the scientific problem, then really hiring the best notch like sales and marketing team and understand your go-to-market strategy is important. And then three, I think this climate issue is such a huge one that you actually need to have kind of knock on various doors, right? And not only the venture capital, corporate venture capital, but also the government, the like various like channels that you should tap to. So really being very resourceful is important. And I would like also just touch point on like how we evaluate companies in case you want to bring your business plan to us. So for hard tech or deep tech, we do look at like whether you have POCs or a pilot ready if you're early stage. So really have that done, and your team having good relationship with corporations, and make sure that you know like who are your stakeholders and how to get to this step that you can actually have a few POCs or pilots done before you go to VC is important. Yeah, I'm gonna pause there.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I actually want to jump in here. Something I think a lot about for companies in their trajectory is kind of the balance between regulatory policy and the private sector. And I know that State Senator Stein used to be an environmental lawyer. I'd actually love to shamelessly call on him and ask him for his insight on this.
Thank you. I appreciate the nod, and I threw some ideas in the chat that may be useful to give you a little sense of how we're working right now, at least in California. But I just want to also say, amazing panel, and I love being with this group. And I brought my Cal Keepa for all my friends out there. So just so I think that there's a deep and long history between California and Israel, and I actually had taken a few trips over there with either Milken or other folks, and I was curious from the Israelis or the companies here today too, what the perspective is from their government and how to try to cement something. But look, from the private sector, you're doing very different risk, a very different risk threshold when you're looking at these investments. And I know Mr. Wesley, it takes ventures, and that National Grid or Shell's risk threshold is going to be different if you're in utilities or oil. I guess we're trying to look comprehensively at it and how to fill gaps. And so, we put a couple funds together that are there for the smaller folks to be doing seed capital and, handing out grants, $1 million or so to do bench scale demonstration projects, working at, say, our national labs or taking advantage of some of the capital infrastructure we got to do sort of really early stage, high risk stuff that venture may not want to fund yet. And so that's a really nice place to incubate, especially if you have some California partners. So that program, and like Cyclotron Road, which is up at LBNL, is a really great sort of toehold for the smaller folks. And then for the bigger folks, I think, we're looking at larger scale loan guarantees and, multi-million-dollar, even 10 million, even potentially larger. We'll see. I mean, we're looking at a very big investment, say, in Lithium Valley and doing some early stage work out in the Salton Sea area. There's already been about $25 million invested, and the Australians are invested out there. And I think the Scottish are out there, and there's a few other companies, but just one example. There's so many sectors. I mean, you've seen BYD come in and start to really dominate the bus and manufacturing space in Los Angeles. For Israeli companies, I mean, we know you guys are huge also in ag tech, and so obviously, that's all still going really big in California. But I think it's a diverse landscape. I mean, the biggest problem I've found, we'd love to, we've tried to push a way to fund our MOU with Israel and actually formalize a partnership with the country and doing like bird style funding upstream with the UC. But so far, it's hard to get our political climates synced so that one of our countries isn't in the midst of a roiling, crazy election, calm enough to actually like have an agreement. So when we met with, say, Minister Elkin, when we were in Jerusalem last, we were trying to land some kind of deal with the Knesset, where the California legislature and the Knesset were both sort of moving in parallel, but the budget cycles haven't timed out and the political cycles haven't timed out. So I still think there's really important, sort of formal work to be done, government to government. But I also think that, doors are wide open here for aggressive, either high risk or commercially mature projects and doing procurement on a really large scale. I mean, you're talking about, 5 gigawatt offshore wind concept starting to get developed, the energy storage space. Herzberg talked a little bit about hydrogen, aggregated demand response into reliability. There's so many. So, and even that downstream conversion that Shell was talking about, I think that's a huge space. I think refining is going to be a really innovative sector, drop-in fuels. There's a lot going into that sector too, as the oil majors really take ownership of the climate problem and start to turn the corner here and maybe look at flipping some of our assets. So hope that wasn't too long-winded, but yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah, is anything new? I mean, we love the Innovation Authority. We love the Chief Science Office and a lot of the folks in Israel. I just want I want more. I want people to see that side of Israel in the United States. I'm sick of these other headlines. So I think you guys are all the good news.
Thank you, Senator Stern. Definitely, I think an important role in bridging the gap between the public and private. And I think in that aspect, Joanna, you've been in your career both between the private and the public sector. So maybe you could share a little bit on your journey, and you choose to focus on green impact technologies, put a pretty high bar in place. That would be interesting, I think, to understand why and what is important to you.
Sure. Yeah. So let me take those one by one. So I used to lead the U.S. Department of Energy's Tech to Market office, where the goal was to to help channel DOE's very healthy, very robust R&D program dollars to companies and projects in a way that would make them more commercial ready. That was kind of the primary goal. So a great example to have in mind would be, think about researchers at national labs in the US doing a lot of, good work, primarily funded by the Department of Energy, but partially funded by industry. How do you really, as a researcher in a national lab, how do you really get mentally outside the walls of the lab and know whether or not what you're working on is of relevance to the private sector? That can be really challenging. So one of the things we worked on was a program where those researchers could really get training in what we call customer discovery or market discovery, doing a really simple, straightforward thing about, talking to people to validate what, desire for a product or a solution. It's simple, but it's totally transformational, and it's not something scientists are trained to do. So when you start to instill that kind of mental shift or cultural change in a university or national lab environment, that's the kind of thing that ends up really training research dollars in a more market-driven way. So it's just one example, and we could talk more about that. But so that's a lot of what I think about from the government R&D side. Is I don't want government to necessarily change what it's doing in terms of the types of I think it's good if government is funding a pipeline of technologies, both from very foundational research to applied research, potentially to projects. But even in that early stage research, you can be doing it in a way that's with a market mindset. One of the most interesting things about that role, though, was that it really gave me a chance to, at least in the US, think about but there are learnings for other countries, to think about what are the ways we do or don't support early stage startup companies well. And that's been spoken about a little bit here, some of the gaps that are persistent. And one of the clearest gaps, although there are a few, is this early stage kind of proof of concept or venture financing gap, where a technology might be at the spin out stage from a university, it might be promising, but it probably does not have commercial validation yet. And most venture investors, understandably, this is what they're really good at, is kind of trying to piece out what are the early indicators of market appetite for a new product that a company is developing. And if it's just a bit too early for that, it's going to be hard for that company to secure investment. So what we do at Prime is really purpose built to play in that gap, where we're aggregating capital that is otherwise likely to go to NGOs and policy work and the like, so otherwise likely to be granted, but we're doing venture investing with it. That gives us a very unique ability as a venture investor to have to embrace risk and long timelines to returns. And the intent there is just to bridge companies to a point where they could be attractive to a follow-on investor, such as the Wesley Group or another investor on the phone. So that's kind of the goal. And then in terms of the second question about why did we focus on green technologies in this very high bar, it really comes down to, for us, the fact pattern of the climate crisis. So we know that we need to reduce emissions globally on the order of 70 gigatons a year, within, starting within a decade or so from now. We're nowhere close to that trajectory yet. We also know that from studies from the IEA and others that about half of those emission savings could come from broader deployment of commercially available technologies that we have today. This is like scaled deployment of wind and solar storage, et cetera. And about a third to a half will need to come from technologies that are not yet commercially available. And so that's where we play. And then taking that a step further, so that's why we're focused on really big emissions reduction, because we don't think we'll get there. We don't think we can meet those goals otherwise. And then further, while there's a lot you can do toward decarbonization when you focus on kind of data analytics and capital light innovation, you can't get everywhere. So we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about manufacturing processes when we're looking at where the emission source is coming from. And there's a limit to our ability to really reduce emissions from those types of the physical economy if we're not talking about physical hardware innovation. And so that is why we further tend to focus on that subset of companies that are developing hardware-based innovations.
Thank you, Joanna. I want to try maybe and focus in the last 10 minutes about the US-Israel aspect. All of us have been going COVID pandemic. It made it in some aspects harder to meet face-to-face, to be able to execute projects between areas that are remote. So anyone from the panel members, could you shed some light on the cross-border challenges and how you think COVID affected that as an investor, and what entrepreneurs should expect coming forward?
I'll take a crack at that, Sarit. From our standpoint, the world is already going global at a faster rate than we'd understood. COVID just made it happen faster. First, you don't have to get on a 14-hour plane or to Israel, or 11-hour plane to Europe or Asia. We're on Zoom like that. And so it really made the world closer. Second, there's just this growing awareness that all of us need to move faster. And that means you need to be smart about picking the best new technologies and the best entrepreneurs from all over the world. In a nutshell, I think it's great because it's given everybody a chance to get the best ideas forward. The last thing I just wanted to say quickly, and I agree with every word Bob Herzberg said, but he said, we're not seeing that many headlines anymore. I'm here to tell you, I think you're going to see more headlines every year from here on out. And one of the most interesting ones for me, because someone asked about seed companies, we invested in this little unknown, crappy electric car company in San Carlos, California, 12 years ago, called Tesla. They had 29 people and said they were going to challenge the auto world. Even my wife said, you've lost your mind investing in electric cars. Go get your money back. Today, this California-based company has a market cap that's bigger than the next 8 auto companies in the world combined. So there is still massive opportunity for innovation. Even the giants like Tesla, not so long ago, 12 years ago, only had 29 people. So there's the potential today to go from tiny to enormous if you have big ideas and you can execute. And we're welcoming the next generation of entrepreneurs from any part of the world because that's where you find winners. And we're excited about this.
Really well said, Steve.
Steve, hey, Steve, can I say something on that?
You bet. You bet, Bob.
All I was going to say is, I was suggesting that the politicians chase the headlines for percentages of RPSs and new programs. The entrepreneurs are blowing it out. I get that, but yet you look at the company, and here you've got Elon talking about going to Texas and moving and stuff because him trying to integrate in this world is so difficult. And I was trying to talk about the practical interrelationships between the shift of this explosion against how does government deal with it. No, it's a fantastic story. I agree.
Right. And look, one thing we can all agree on is Elon's a pain in the butt. He may be a great entrepreneur, but he's not easy. But by the way, if we had 10 more legislators like Bob and Henry in Sacramento who have both been in the private sector and the public sector, it would keep California on top globally for the next 10 years. So I am just really darn grateful to have both of you here. Thank you.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, Phoebe. I don't know if you were in the middle of it. I was going to try to answer Gary too. I was typing a way too long of a note in a chat. I'm an old millennial, so I feel more comfortable in a chat room than I do talking. But anyway, I didn't want to interrupt you, Phoebe. Go ahead.
No worries. And here's the obviously, like, I also share the Cal relation. So happy to see you over here. So I just want to kind of echo what Steve mentioned, right? I think the COVID actually make everything a lot faster. So just from the number of investments perspective, right? So in my whole career as a venture capitalist, that's like dated like 9 years ago. I invested like 20 plus companies, and 7 of them invested last year. So it's like just like you save your time on the road, you save the time. Like now I like my Zoom meetings back to back, and then I can actually talk to someone in Israel now and then talk to someone in China next. And so it's really like save you a lot of time. Now, a lot of people would ask like how you build the relationship and how you do like the on-site DD, right? I think the on-site DD is something that if you're investing in climate tech, a lot of the companies that we're looking at actually have plans that you actually need to do. So hopefully like we all get a vaccination by then so that we can still do those trips. But I actually see a shift, drastic shift from moving from like face-to-face meetings to really like Zoom meetings. And then that's actually a very good, like a good opportunity for cross-border deals, just because you would be able to kind of talk to like Steve Wesley if you're in Israel and just set up a Zoom call. I think that's really, really good opportunity, and everyone on this call should definitely seize that. Yeah. Okay, over to you, Senator Herzberg.
Oh, I just gave the quick summary is there was a question about distributed solar. I was just saying that, yeah, I frankly wish we had the kind of some of the open access that Israel had. It's been a tough slog for distributed solar and community solar these days. Just since we have Texas on the line, it's a little bit of a, you know, there's such a huge force in the room, and the politics of Tesla and labor battling in California have resulted in probably not as much excitement, say, from our electrical workers and some of the key partners who need to install these systems. And so DG is currently, you know, under fire, I would say, and we'll see how it handles it this year. But all that's going to be negotiated this session. So if you have distributed solar or storage and care about it in California, it's a really important year to stand up for it, because it's, you know, it sort of tends towards a total utility control model, and that can have some value. But Gary, that's the biggest impediment at the moment. So I don't want to end up, but I don't want to end on bad news. I did want to say thanks to the moderator. Please do lean on us if you want to apply for some of these, either interested in the small grants or some of the bigger demonstration work. We can hook you up with the Energy Commission, and they're doing this work all the time. And Chairman Hochschild went on this trip to Israel with me and kind of rediscovered his Jewish roots too. So they're all ready to get to work.
שאלה מטורונטו, אני כרגע בארץ. יש לי שאלה לגבי הצוותים. נניח שאנחנו פותרים את כל
We have someone on the line that is speaking in...
I don't know if we can actively mute.
Okay, I think we're fine. I think it was just...
I thought she was talking to us at first, and I thought, no, this is not for us.
Yes, okay. I'm sorry about that. It was probably just a hiccup with somebody's phone. Okay, Sarit, we are back to you.
Yes, so I wanted first to take the opportunity to thank everybody for putting the time and effort and the passion. I always enjoy passionate discussions. I think for the startup companies in this room, there is so much ecosystem around, and you definitely can see people like us collaborating with all of our peers, with other venture firms. It's a very open community. I advise everybody to reach out, ask questions. We are happy, even sometimes if it's not in our scope to be able to help and introduce you other people. And I know that my colleagues have done that for me as well. So thank you very much for the time, for the effort, and I look forward to this journey. It's exciting.
Thank you, Sarit.
Thank you so much, Sarit, and thank you for all the speakers that we had earlier in the morning, and of course in this discussion. Well, the one thing that is really exciting when we talk on energy, and I'm just echoing what Sarit said. This is one of the industries where we see a true collaboration within so many different stakeholders within the industry. So we have the government, we have the investors, and we have the innovators, because we talk on infrastructure, Senator Stern mentioned also the labor and the community that need to be also vested into the energy projects, because if we don't have, us as individuals support, then a lot of it won't happen. So just a quick reminder for all of you that our sessions were recorded. They can be available on our YouTube channel. We had 3 fascinating days with a lot of discussions, a lot of people that participated. Everyone was so kind to share their contact information. If you need more help from us, reaching out to the grants, different grants that we discussed, to reach out to the investors, to reach out to the ecosystem connectors, the big projects initiators, please reach out to us and we will be very happy to make those introductions. The discussion can keep on during the next 3 months on our virtual platform. We already put the links several times in the chat box. If you cannot find it, again, reach out to us and we will be happy to do it. Thank you, Sarit, Steve, Andre, Senator Stern, Maya, everyone else that I see on my screen. Thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today.
Thank you so much. And this was the 3rd day of an incredible 3-day series in clean energy technology. Conferences are great, but it's really about also the conversations subsequently. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and my partner, John, in California to figure out how do we create more innovative partnerships and pipelines. Thank you so much. And I want to just do one final, I know I do this a lot, but I would like to do one final thank you again to our sponsors, Pillsbury Law Firm and Light of Help Philanthropies. This sort of event is, as you all know, we all participated in this gratis, and that is only because we have sponsors. So thank you so much, really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Delek.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.